So I was asked to make a video about Roger Ver and his book Hijacking Bitcoin, which I have not read, but it is not necessary for me to read it because I've spent years arguing with him and every single person that he sent to our way to troll us, nearly to the point of complete and utter distraction. But we had a friendly bull market keep our spirits up whilst dealing with this complete astroturfed nonsense. But yeah, full disclosure, I haven't read that book. I've tried to watch some summaries of it, and it does exactly what I'd have expected. Basically, it comes down to this. I can say that traffic's super bad in my city, and we could make cars go 8 times faster, but the government don't like us, and therefore they've infiltrated every single car manufacturer in the world and made them not make these new engines they could have, which could drive at 800 miles an hour around town, and everyone would have a better life. That's basically the argument he's making. And the problem is, it's pretty easy for most people to understand that, hey, wait a minute, won't there be problems if everyone's driving at 800 miles an hour? Like, is there any trade-off there? Like, there are maybe some issues that come if you start doing that. Like, people can see that that's not realistic, right? But, it's not realistic to the point where cars can actually pretty easily go above 100 miles an hour, but 99% of the time they don't because they're driving around town, and you have to completely redesign the town, and you can't have a town anymore if you need to design it around the fact that cars on average are going to be driving 800 miles an hour around it. That looks like more like a highway, right? You can't design a town to work the way a highway does because it's horrible for a bunch of reasons and dangerous. So someone's come along and said, ignore all the sort of practical reasons why this isn't realistic and just focus on the fact that we can't trust the government and there are evil people and Bitcoin was a good ethical project and they wanted to destroy it. Like, there's people that can understand narratives that are created like that. And Roger, annoyingly, he's just not a person of integrity at all. He will just sprinkle facets of truth and give you an impression that he's an underdog and a victim in order to convince you and leave you convinced of what he wanted you to believe. He's not going to rigorously dig and dig and dig and try and find the truth and talk and make sure you leave with the right impression. He's just going to make you believe what he wants you to believe. He's a salesman, and he's an unscrupulous one at that. So first off, I'll debunk some of the claims he makes around this supposed underdog victimization that he suffered as a result of being who he was. He had hundreds of thousands of Bitcoin. He owned Bitcoin.com, and he owned the subreddit r/BTC, and he owned the Twitter handle @Bitcoin. Now, his argument that he was censored and was unable to discuss what it is he thought needed to be discussed, even though the technical element of it being a non-starter was just so well established years prior, he would nonetheless just cry underdog. Like, I'm being censored and muted and, like, silenced and all this. Like, dude, you own Bitcoin.com. That is the most valuable real estate there is here. And everyone quickly learned that it was just this guy pushing his stupid scam version of Bitcoin. And, the fact that he's called Bitcoin Jesus is more insight into the character of the person you're dealing with. If you are of a narcissistic bent, like this guy is, when you have an idea and when you've staked your reputation and ego on having oversold a product like Bitcoin, being told no by engineers is just not acceptable. You want to strangle these people. And this is like the archetype for the sort of psychopathic, hyper-successful businessman that Roger is, right? Like, you say, I want to do this. And some guy in a white lab coat sitting in your boardroom says, well, we can't really do that because of some technical limitation. And you pull out a gun and shoot the guy because he's against you. He disagrees with you. Who is he to do such a thing? And he just needs to find a way. Fire him and get someone else. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to keep your ego in check and learn that there are limitations to things. So in Bitcoin, the limitations come from the fact that it's two things at once, and both of those things need to work, and neither of them can take precedence entirely over the other without the entire system just collapsing. So you have the fact that it is a payment network on which you can move money around permissionlessly, peer-to-peer, without any centralized custodian or third party. This is great. And there was never a payment network like that until Bitcoin. Everything else, unless you just used cash, because cash literally doesn't have a network. It's literally you just handing it to someone else. There's no, there's not a decentralized network of people that will ferry your cash around for you, and you can trust that it will get from A to B with a bunch of hops in between. Cash doesn't work like that, right? Cash is literally peer-to-peer. There's not really a network. Bitcoin has a decentralized network that functions like that and makes you able to do what cash does on, digitally. But that's just a new way of doing something like Visa and what PayPal offer and all that permissionlessly without having to sign up or without needing ID or all that. That's great. But that's got nothing to do with the money that moves around on that network, which is also confusingly called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a deflationary currency, and this is supposed to give us the benefits of the gold standard without the problems the gold standard had, which is it's impractical as a medium of exchange. Bitcoin is supposed to solve that by being something that undermines the evil goal of the central bank, which is using money as a weapon against a population that uses it as a store of value and siphoning purchasing power, siphoning their net worth away from them in order to siphon wealth upwards towards people that own all the scarce assets, as opposed to the unscarce currency that is being used to price everything. And it's a very effective technique because everyone just looks at it and goes, why is everything so expensive? I don't get it. Oh, rich people. And it's because your money's losing value. And Bitcoin is a fantastic vehicle for people to use as gold 2.0. But gold 2.0 suffers the same fate as gold 1.0. And conversely, in a mask-off moment where Roger told everyone, I think if we increase the block size, which is what all this comes down to, it was called the block size war or the fork wars. If we increase the size of blocks and we run the risk of Bitcoin becoming PayPal 2.0, I think that is a risk worth taking. Very revealing moment, because that's basically the only time he's ever acknowledged that there's ever even a trade-off to what he was advocating for. But I'll take it. Because what is PayPal 2.0, Roger? How does it differ from PayPal 1.0? Is it because it has a native currency and there's no such thing as PayPal coin? We just move dollars or pounds around on it or whatever? Doesn't sound very compelling to me. That sounds like a permissioned payment network with its own currency on top of it that's also created by and for a centralized group, a third-party, extremely wealthy quintillionaires. It sounds like what we already have. It doesn't sound philosophically different at all. What makes Bitcoin unique is that it's decentralized. And the fact that it's decentralized is an artifact or a result of it being these two things. And you have to look at Bitcoin as having a right leg and a left leg, and they have to walk in concert with one another. And I genuinely think we have the opposite of the fork wars happening right now. And you have the other side taking precedence and forgetting, this is kind of why Roger is surfacing at the moment and why he's gaining popularity, and why even Bitcoin developers I've seen, like James S.O.B. is his name, James O.B., they're just saying, oh, Roger was kind of right, he had a point and all that. Like, it's, for some reason, this just seems to be beyond too many people for them to grasp. Bitcoin, if treated as gold 2.0, stops being gold 2.0. It's not gold. Bitcoin cannot maintain hard monetary characteristics that prevent arbitrary inflation if you do away with the decentralized payment aspect of it. So people like Michael Saylor, who are doing the opposite of what Roger did back in the day, but making the mirror image mistake, is they're saying, I don't really care about permissionless payments. Who cares about any of that stuff? Who cares about buying coffee with Bitcoin? Who cares about being able to have access if you're one of the people in the world that, transaction fees are going to hit hard? It doesn't really matter. I'm going to store hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins and maintain billions and billions of dollars in purchasing power while everyone else around me collapses and while the ice melts in their fingers. Like, you don't get to maintain the value of that, because it's not actually gold. The scarcity is not enforced by the rules of the universe. The scarcity of Bitcoin is enforced by the fact that there's a decentralized network of nodes that are constantly reaffirming the finiteness of the supply. And those nodes run in order to permissionlessly interact with the network. And one of the most important ways they interact with it is by transacting. So if you're not going to do that anymore, if no one has made any Bitcoin transactions lately, or if there's a very minimal amount of it, how much reaffirmation of the fact that there's only 21 million of these things is really going on? Because if it all starts happening off chain, because no one can be bothered wrestling with the Bitcoin network directly, if they're all just using third-party custodians, which people like Michael Saylor are absolutely fine with, then Bitcoins start moving around that don't exist in the system. If I send you 10 Bitcoins from my Coinbase account to your Coinbase account, are they a part of the 21 million, or are they just fabricated? And the more fabricated Bitcoins exist, the more you end up with going straight back to gold 1.0, which is third-party custodians control it all. And it turns out the finiteness of this thing, which is enforced by the physics, the laws of the universe say there can only be so much gold, doesn't matter if you're not enforcing that by using it yourself. If you're moving gold around by swapping promissory notes with other people, that gold that the paper reflects might not exist. So the finiteness of the gold becomes, it becomes a sort of a thing we have this ceremonial homage to, and these tattoos of 21 million, but they don't mean anything because you're not enforcing it with your day-to-day activity. This is the error that the modern Bitcoiner is making by treating it only as a store of value. And Roger Vere's assertion is that that was a mistake to do that, and he's right. But Roger Ver completely discounts the fact that he makes the opposite mistake, which is if you only care about the permissionless payment network element of it, peer-to-peer digital cash, make blocks as big as they need to be in order to facilitate every single person in the world being able to make Bitcoin transactions on the base layer for basically free, if not completely free, then you do away with the store of value element of it, because no one's going to be able to become an enforcer of the rule set in that scenario either, because they can't. In my scenario, in the Michael Saylor world, we've ended up in a world where 21 million falls apart by virtue of the fact that no one is reaffirming that the thing is real anymore. So you have an arbitrary amount of Bitcoins, and by neglecting the permissionless payment network element of it, you undermine the 21 million scarce finite supply element of it. The converse mistake is what Roger did, to finish off that point, the reason that that's a mistake, the Saylor approach and the Gold 2.0 approach still allows on a technical basis for people to use it permissionlessly in the capacity that they can still run a node because you don't have enormous blocks. So it's not as bad. Roger, on the other hand, is pointing out the flaw in that worldview and that approach for Bitcoin, but his advocacy for a solution to his concerns is way worse, unfortunately. So I'm acknowledging that Roger is right in his concerns. His solution is just laughable. If you make blocks arbitrarily large so that everyone can store as much data in them as they possibly want, in that world, no one runs nodes. And like he says, that's PayPal 2.0. And PayPal 2.0, in any conceivable world, he never defined what he meant by that. But PayPal 2.0 is just PayPal 1.0. The implication is that they'd just be centralized. And if they're centralized, then the permissionless medium of exchange element disappears. And if that disappears, 21 million disappears, and Bitcoin is just completely and utterly pointless. It becomes just everything you'd hate, or it would just completely vanish into oblivion like every other shitcoin in the crypto space is, either done already or is in the process of doing. It's a non-starter. Basically, to the Rogers of the world, I say you need to respect the fact that people have to be able to run nodes, and that's the expected use case, and that they verify everything they do directly, and they can do so cheaply and easily. It's not just about how expensive it is to transact. Because guess what? That might be the only thing we can do in another way, where we find some other method to scale it. And you're looking at clever stuff. Like, I hate to use this analogy, but I'm going to do it. You want to have like carpool lanes. Instead of just adding more and more lanes, which we all know doesn't fix traffic, even though naively you think it would. And just like you can't make cars go at highway speeds inside a city center to alleviate congestion because it just wouldn't work. There'd be too many accidents and too much, nothing is designed that way. You'd literally have to redesign the city to look like a highway, at which point you've defeated the point of it being a center of a city, right? Like, something cleverer like, well, if we put a carpool lane on here, then that means there are more people in each car. That starts to look like something more intelligent as a scaling solution, right? And that's what Bitcoin has eventually settled on, which was something's got to give. Everything falls apart if we start making blocks bigger. But everything falls apart as well if people have to pay thousands of dollars to get inside the blockchain. Now, this is all theoretical because right now it's basically free to use the blockchain, and that's after a couple of years of intense spam attacks where Bitcoin was really expensive to use. But I'm gonna sit here and carry on in worst case scenario, which we're not in at all at the moment. If you want to open a Lightning channel right now, it's 1 sat per byte. So go ahead and spend 3 cents opening a Lightning channel. So it was a non-starter, and you should know that when someone talks about Bitcoin was supposed to be this, and its vision was distorted by governments that didn't want Bitcoin to succeed. They wanted to turn it into a store of value only and get rid of the permissionless payment element of it. This is just a person that actually, I'm not going to say that he is lying to you, because he's that much of a narcissist that he doesn't want to say things he knows to be untrue, but he has a decent intuition. He has a strong enough intuition that he knows when to stick his fingers in his ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening. And that's what he's managed to do for years. So the minute you start talking about, hey, do you know there's some issues with making blocks bigger? He'll just say, hard drives are getting cheaper and internet's getting faster. It's not an issue. Now that's a straw man dismissal of the kinds of problems you get with making blocks arbitrarily large. And we know that we can't just keep adding lanes to the highway or making cars get faster and faster, because we know that you just run up against other problems. So we came up with SegWit and we came up with Lightning. And these are ways in which you can do a lot more transacting without the hassle of the blockchain and still permissionlessly. And this is a very clever solution to these kinds of things. Payment channels, again, that was an idea from back in Satoshi's era. And payment channels are just, rather than a Bitcoin transaction be a Bitcoin transaction is the beginning of a financial relationship which can span for many transactions before ultimately being settled up back on the blockchain. And the two transactions alleviate congestion because realistically you're doing so much economic activity for the same amount of block space as you would have done without it. So that's really cool. That's that's real scaling. And today there are even more ambitious ideas like coin pools and and there's even interesting things like Liquid and all that. But I mean, I know Roger specifically talks about those as being the motive. Liquid was the baby of Blockstream, and Blockstream is the person or the entity that Roger accuses of being the ones who hijacked Bitcoin, and their supposed motivation is they want to push financial activity to the side chains like Liquid. But it's just stupid, because ultimately that's where it's going to end up. You can't make blocks large enough for tens of millions of people to be buying cups of coffee all day, every day. Think about the amount of data you're talking about. This is very easy to understand. This is like saying, hey, why don't we decentralize YouTube, break it up from Google, and just make it so that everyone can run a YouTube node in their phone? Like decentralize YouTube that way. Every single person in the world has to store all of the videos that exist on YouTube in their house on some hard drive, and have enough bandwidth for every single person in the world to be able to stream a video directly from them. Like, it's an argument like that. That's obviously not technically feasible, right? So if you want all the world's economic activity to take place on something like as crude as Bitcoin's L1, then you're dreaming. Because It is possible, but all that will happen is the people that run the infrastructure for Bitcoin's L1 will be like 3 giant big data companies. That's it. You're not going to have them be a disparate, ragtag group of crypto anarchists, or however Saylor would call us. You're not going to get that. You're just going to get, it's going to be Amazon or Facebook or one of these like giant companies again that's going to gatekeep it and make the whole thing permissionless. And in that context, you don't have permissionless payments. You don't have 21 million coins because they'll have control over that as well necessarily. So what's the goal? Why would you do that? I can't see any reason for it other than, fair enough, Satoshi himself was naive enough to think you could just do that. You could just not care about how big blocks get. I think that was Satoshi just lacking vision. Like, if I can accuse it, obviously such a unbelievable human as Satoshi is missing the point. But, I think he underestimated how big and successful Bitcoin would be. And I think when we read back, it was more posts from people like Hal that would be like, it might make sense. Like, this thing might be worth $100 million per coin at some point. Like, the fact that that's actually basically going to happen now, and we see that that's on the cards, you just have to say, look, how much financial activity can we really squeeze into this thing and make it possible for the people that maintain the decentralization of this to continue existing and to continue doing what they're doing? It's an uphill battle. It's been an uphill battle since the beginning of Bitcoin. How many people run nodes versus how many people are using Bitcoin? And it's always trending in a bad direction, no matter what you do. And the essence of the block wars or the block size wars was, let's not make it any worse. If we double the block size, if we 20x the block size, which was that was when they started compromising the big block camp. They went down to 20 megabytes from way bigger. And I don't remember what the number was, but the biggest early number I remember from 2015 was, Bitcoin XT or Bitcoin Classic or something like that, one of these joke forks, and it was 20 megabytes per block. If we'd have done that back then, the entire blockchain would be multiple terabytes by now. If it would be tens of terabytes probably. And if that was the case, guess what? No one's running a node anymore. The entire self-hosted Bitcoin node revolution that happened inside HODL culture, that was Umbrel and Start9 and Raspberry Blitz and MyNode, all of those projects. Sorry, you can't buy a Raspberry Pi and a 1 terabyte SSD anymore. You have to, you're going to need to fork out something like thousands of dollars for a drive that's capable of this stuff, and you're going to need a commercial grade internet connection. If you do that, there aren't tens of thousands of nodes anymore. There's hundreds at best. And the trend would be so bad, and the culture would reflect that being the limitations of it, and we would just converge and coalesce around different values. Suddenly, Bitcoin would not be about decentralization anymore. It would be about short-sighted maintenance of trying to make something work the way it worked when there were only a few thousand of us, with millions of people, without seriously approaching how you scale something like that, without massively degrading elements of it. And Roger is just not prepared to engage on these topics without talking about corruption and politics and ignoring any of the technical limits. You already have the trend towards fewer Bitcoiners that are interacting with the system, doing so on their own terms via their own nodes. That's already a trend in the wrong direction. You have the trend towards centralization of mining pools, which is horrific in a big block world. Right now, if you're solo mining, that means running your own node, by the way, and I'm probably going to have to make a whole video on that. If you're solo mining Bitcoin and you find a block, you get to tell the network about it, and they'll lap it up pretty quickly, and they'll start building on top of your block. Additionally, if Foundry or Antpool, one of the two pools out there that basically have centralized all of mining, at least at the moment, if they find a block, you little solo miner, you can download it and verify it in a couple of seconds. If you make blocks 20 megabytes, then that's not possible anymore. And any miner that's trying to mine in a small pool is just going to have to suffer the fact that on average they don't find 100% of the blocks they expect to find. They find like 95% because some giant pool out there is finding 70% of the blocks, and whenever they find a block, they start building on top of it immediately. But you, when you download the latest block they have, you have to spend 10 seconds downloading it and another 3 seconds verifying everything in it. That adds up in a 10-minute race you have to do for 70% of the blocks. That doesn't work. And trade-offs like that, you got to understand, guys. I had a job in 2016 and 2017. I would get up, I would go on Reddit, I would have 100 unread responses, I would just argue all day with people saying, we want big blocks and Bitcoin's been hijacked. And I would try and bring up these points, and they would never address them, ever. They would never talk about it on a technical basis. They would just call me a Blockstream shill when I was just a random stoner musician living in London who'd never even run Linux yet. That was who I was back then. I didn't have any position inside the Bitcoin community, nothing like I have now. And this was it. I just thought originally I was a big blocker, right? And originally I got into Bitcoin for the use case Roger was so enamored by, which is permissionless payment network. I didn't care about Bitcoin, the money. If I wanted to buy some weed on Silk Road, the way to do it was buy some Bitcoin, send it to Silk Road, buy the thing, and then don't have any Bitcoins anymore. And it was the most amazing thing ever. Like, I've already explained my love and passion for all that stuff in the previous video on this channel called Green Camel Did Nothing Wrong. Like, I get it. I have exactly the same love for it, but it doesn't scale. You can't have that with 10 million people using it and expect it to be permissionless where you can just run your own node. That's not a thing, Roger. It's not. And saying it would be a thing if the government hadn't co-opted Bitcoin development or something of that nature is bullshit. You don't get to sit around and tell people cars suck because the government ruined them. All right, they probably did. But I'm saying cars don't suck to the tune of we can't drive at 800 miles an hour down Main Street. That's not why you can't. It's not the government that's preventing that. It's literally how towns work. It's literally the nature of having a small hub of activity with lots of people and lots of stores, as opposed to something sparse where there isn't anything like a highway. Like that's the analogy for it. You can't just say, I could drive through downtown Los Angeles or, through Manhattan or something. I could drive through these things at hundreds of miles an hour, but the government's ruining it. That's not a thing. And if you have a solution for that, I think you're probably ignoring some of the elements that make those things unique, right? So it comes down to fundamentally, if you want to just make blocks larger and larger and larger so that everyone can use Bitcoin as a permissionless payment network, all that happens is it becomes permissioned. That's it. So right now, Bitcoin is permissionless, but it can get really expensive, which is its own form of gatekeeping. And I understand that, and I'm sympathetic to that. That's why I spent years working at a company that was trying to make it easy for people to run Lightning nodes. And I've done more education and support in this capacity than most people you're ever going to meet. If you're trying to run a Bitcoin node and you're trying to run a Lightning node, I'm going to try and help you to do stuff like that. This has been my job, whether I've been paid to do it or whether I've just done it out of love, for the best part of 10 years. So, I mean, Lightning wasn't a thing until, we had SegWit, and the first time I ever used Lightning wasn't until January 2018, when, it was still very early, right? And I managed to buy some Blockstream swag. But, within a couple of years, it was just my job. Like, we fought the war to that effect. We said, Roger, you're wrong. This is not how you scale Bitcoin. And Roger's, response has just been to never listen to the past 10 minutes of rambling I've just done. Roger's never, ever, ever engaged in any of that beyond saying hard disks are getting cheaper and internet connections are getting faster. Do you think that's a valid rebuttal of everything I just said in the last 10 or 15 minutes? If you think it is, then you are literally the kind of person that thinks you can just raise the speed limit on Main Street to 150 miles an hour and clean up congestion in like downtown Paris or London or something like that. You don't understand what you're talking about. It's way more complicated than that. So you cannot engage with someone like that in good faith, though you can try and you can try. And it's really annoying because, well, let's zoom out. Let's talk more about Roger's circumstances. He's been a con man forever. He will always present himself as a victim in any circumstances, even when he's got the upper hand, which is really annoying because, yes, we got fed up with him on bitcointalk.org and reddit.com/r/Bitcoin. Sure, big blog posts started getting deleted from that, and I'm sure that was very hurtful to him. However, he owned bitcoin.com, which was, an incredibly cited news source, and pushed his alternative solution, which is a joke, by the way, but he called it Bitcoin. Bitcoin on bitcoin.com was his version that did the thing he thought was the correct way to do it. And this censored government-pushed version of it that was, he would call Bitcoin Core, which is just ridiculous. That's the name of an implementation. It's not the currency, but he called it Bitcoin Core. And do you know how many people I dealt with that went on bitcoin.com and bought Bitcoin and didn't get Bitcoin? They got his version of it. I get that he doesn't want to cede linguistic territory because he really does think he's right. But where you don't get, where it becomes inexcusable is the fact that you refuse to listen or engage honestly with people that are explaining to you why you're wrong. That's not acceptable. He's unable to change his view on stuff when he is categorically just spouting complete falsehoods and clearly doesn't have an understanding of the technology. It's just all personal, and he's embarrassed because he's oversold this product as being something that can scale to hundreds of millions of people and maintain all the qualities it has with tens of thousands. So right now he finds himself in a circumstance where Bitcoiners, the people he's been trashing for years and calling, sellouts and, number go up is all they care about and they're not here for freedom, really. Those people are now defending him because after a lifetime of scamming, the government is after him. They're finally after him for the one thing he's done that wasn't immoral, which was he didn't pay an exit tax. And I think he tried to get cute by saying, I gave all the Bitcoins to my sister. They weren't mine, so I didn't owe you anything when I left the country. Exit tax is completely immoral. Taxation is immoral, and exit tax is immorality on top of that. The justification people use to justify taxation in general is you get the benefit of living in the country where those taxes are spent, right? You get a police force or a fire service or hospitals or, in like roads. They like to use that argument, right? But that argument, it's a joke anyway, but that argument goes out of the window if I'm leaving your country. You still want half of my net worth to spend on things that I couldn't conceivably benefit from. I mean, it's just layers and layers of immorality. And every Bitcoiner I know, at least, is saying, yeah, I can't stand Roger. He's a complete piece of shit and a liar and spouting nonsense about Bitcoin's history and completely just engaging in revisionism and, and has managed to convince himself that he's a martyr, which shouldn't really surprise you. The whole Messiah complex is part and parcel with someone that calls himself Bitcoin Jesus. This, like, you are dealing with a straight up textbook narcissist that will stick their fingers in their ears if you ever disagree with them. And I get it. We all have narcissistic traits. But the point is, occasionally you have moments of clarity and go, yeah, I think I was wrong about this. Roger's unable to do that. Unfortunately, his narcissism is really ruining his life at this point. He's been a horrible and immoral person for decades. He just hit every stroke of luck a person could possibly hit anyway. He did fantastically well. He got into Bitcoin really early. He had hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins. His life could have been perfect, but his own ego, he tripped over his own dick, to use my favorite expression at the moment. Just absolutely couldn't get over himself to the point where he has hurt himself. But nonetheless, in the sort of in this poetic way that the universe likes to demonstrate its own sense of humor, the one thing that the people he's been attacking as having no principles and selling out Bitcoin, the one thing he's finally in trouble for is the thing we'll all defend him for and show that we actually do have principles, Roger. We think that it's immoral that the government is coming after you for non-payment of exit taxes. That's an immoral thing for them to be pursuing you for. However, the plea that he recently made to Donald Trump to be pardoned is not on the basis of it being an immoral tax. It's on the basis of him being a persecuted victim for his position on crypto, which is, again, trying to paint himself as an underdog, which is completely inappropriate to do so when, like I say, he earned He owned like single-digit percentages of all the Bitcoins that will ever exist, plus Bitcoin.coms, plus r/BTC. He had all the influence in the world, and he squandered it by being too much of a child and bursting out into tears whenever he would get into debates with people, to the point where people just lost respect for the dude, and all their heuristics were yelling at them, I can't trust this dude. But now we live in this world post-COVID where we don't trust anything, and anything that has any sort of contamination with government agencies or anything like that, or even might have, is enough to make most people suspicious. So I see people in the truth movement all over the place that were dead on when it came to COVID and vaccines and climate change and all that stuff, and they just buy it. They see what Roger is peddling and they're like, dude, I get it. Bitcoin, how can it be successful? How can it have got anywhere without it being subverted and captured by the government? There's no way this guy's telling me fibs. Roger must have something here. He's the one in jail, about to be sent to jail forever. And while Bitcoiners are having crypto balls, and Michael Saylor's, up there having this lavish party where they're reinventing gold, and we're all in cahoots with the US administration. I get it. It makes sense. All the political heuristics will tell you Roger is correct. But delve into the technology of it, and you know that it's a crazy nut job telling you that we don't have a bunch of cars driving around at 1,000,000 miles an hour in downtown, whatever city it is. Okay, we don't have that because of the government. Now, I'm sorry, that's just bullshit. Like, that's, if you want a thing, like, you can believe it if you want, but you're not being realistic about what it means to have a nice little downtown area where you can have families walking around and there's shops in close proximity and all that stuff. No one wants cars driving at 1,000,000,000 miles an hour down there. And if that does happen, if the government bans it, that doesn't mean it's it doesn't mean it's wrong for it to stop happening, right? I would love for the government not to ban stuff like that. I guess what I'm saying is I would love for there to be an unlimited block size and for miners to care enough about Bitcoin to never ever fill it up so much that they make life difficult for other miners or they disincentivize people to run full nodes. That's not the world we live in, though, is it? Unfortunately, we have to keep each other in check and we all have to aim guns at each other, and it's something reminiscent of mutually assured destruction. So if you miners want to make blocks that are really big, obnoxiously big, and undermining to the decentralization of the network, your block doesn't exist to us. We will reject it, and you will have burnt a bunch of electricity for no reason. This maintains some of the most important things around what Bitcoin is. And like I say, I think Roger has managed to feel like he's not lying by jamming his fingers in his ears and yelling every time someone comes at him with a substantive rejection of what his position is. I've never seen him allow anyone talk or get to the end of a sentence in any debate. And he does debate the less technical Bitcoiners as well. But it's been thoroughly, thoroughly debunked by sincere, just individuals in Bitcoin, right? These are not spooks. Like, I'm sure there are spooks on the small block side. I'm sure Bitcoin is riddled with spooks, and I'm sure some of them have been on the right side of history many times because that's how you build up trust. And I have some pretty strong suspicions about actually stuff like that. But I ultimately think the way, it's very Bitcoin is full of spooks, actually. And I think it's incredibly important not to start hurling accusations of stuff like that, because you can always push back on a technical basis within Bitcoin, and then the spook is pretty powerless. So, and if you start accusing people of being spooks rather than addressing their concerns on a technical level, then they do the same to you, and no one trusts each other anymore, and you can't get shelling points for any sorts of essential changes or anything like that. So it's very important that we all remain in good faith when discussing things with one another, and that's another reason I really dislike Roger, because just calling everyone spooks and government agents and saying everyone is captured, it creates horrible distrust in the community. And if it's based on a premise of people actually making sound technical arguments, then you do exactly what happened to Roger, which is you play Pied Piper to a bunch of idiots that believe these kinds of narratives, and you go off over to Bcash, and he gets very upset about people calling it Bcash, and I call it that because I, like him, refuse to cede linguistic territory. So Bitcoin is Bitcoin. It's not Bitcoin Core, and Bitcoin Cash has nothing to do with Bitcoin apart from sharing your UTXO set at one point. So they went and they forked, and I can't believe I even forgot to mention that. they had, not only is his underdog thing so, such a mischaracterization given the power he had with all the coins he had and all the domain real estate, he was also backed by the biggest mining entity. Bitmain were on the Bcash side. They, for a time, would only let you buy ant miners, which are overwhelmingly the dominant hardware out there in all Bitcoin mining. They would only accept payment for those miners in Bcash. They wouldn't accept it in Bitcoin. And they spammed the network to absolute death in 2017. You ever sync a node, it flies up into the year 2016, and then it crawls when 2017 hits because the blocks are just filled with absolute crap. They didn't try to hide what they were doing. It was just an absolute gross amount of inputs moving to a gross amount of outputs, and you just see the same. Those outputs would then be in the next block as inputs for the next transaction full of as many outputs. And it would just, ultimately, it was a miner doing this to try and make the network think, oh my goodness, blocks are so full, no one can afford transactions anymore. And it was, I mean, I've made plenty of videos on the fork wars. I don't think it's necessary to get into that in detail, but, I've tried to steelman Roger's position a lot in this. Like, I really have. And it's so hard to do, guys, because he's just such a con man. I said it at the beginning of the video. He will say what he needs to say to get you to believe and to be convinced of his position. But he's never rigorously going to sit there and say, oh, I think you might have misunderstood what I said there. I just want to make sure that you get, like, the proper point. I don't want you to come back to me a year from now and think, oh, that guy misled me. He doesn't care about stuff like that. And it really annoys me, people like that. I'm really taken by this idea of the remnant. And this is what I've tried to do on this channel always, is just say ultimately what I think is true and call myself out if I ever think I'm chatting nonsense, and engage with anyone that disagrees with me, and try not to write off their opinions based on who they are or who they're associated with. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm gonna say things that are going to turn out to be not true that I believe. I'm even going to say things that I think where I even feel like, oh, am I stretching the truth a bit here, or is someone going to misinterpret this even though what I'm saying is true? Even though I'm saying something that's true, but I know people are going to misconstrue it. Do I elaborate on it or not? I try my absolute best not to, and I'm not perfect. But it's the whole remnant approach, right? The idea is if I do this for long enough and I refuse to ever, keep taking the low-hanging fruit for engagement or any of that stuff, slowly but surely I become someone that people in the community can go, all right, I can listen to Mechanic. He's reliable. And whatever the thing is at the moment, if I don't have time to get to the bottom of it, I can listen to what he's saying, and it will probably be somewhere close to somewhere close to the truth. And, because it's my job, right? I'm paid now by Ocean to stay close to all the issues in Bitcoin and figure it out. And other people have other things to do, and they need some source of signal in the course of all the noise. And I've been doing this for years now, and I've been watching my channel slowly grow. I was on Twitter since 2010, and I didn't get 100 followers till like 2014, 2015. I didn't get 1,000 followers for years after that. And slowly but surely it started climbing and climbing and climbing. And Ocean has obviously put me in a position where a lot more people are paying attention to what I have to say. But it hasn't changed the content of what I'm doing. This is as little about me as it could possibly be. The only thing I'm seeking to do with this channel is to create a reliable venue for people that go, all right, if there's an issue and I'm not sure, or I want some interesting perspective on it and thinking, I'm probably going to be able to get something reliable over there. That's all I'm trying to create with it. And I'm trying to do it for the benefit of Bitcoin. And if you don't believe anything is altruistic, fair enough, but you don't need to. You always have that explanation of, I'm heavily invested in Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin and I need this thing to succeed. And one of the things that can make it have problems is everyone believing nonsense. So I decide to, hack through as much of it as possible and try and correct false narratives that are out there and are peddled by idiots like Roger. And this is the thing. This is like, hopefully I can round up this video here. But when I get asked to make videos on stuff like the big blocks and Roger and all that, it just basically, it comes back to me remembering people really, really can just believe really stupid stuff. Like, and it always surprises me because I like to think, maybe I'm just privileged and I have the amount of time to sit and think about stuff, and other people just don't have time. But like Tucker Carlson is a super respected journalist, right? Alex Jones has a massive audience. Roger Ver's been on both those shows, right? And I've seen so many people, like I said, in the truth movement that are swallowing every little piece of bullshit that Roger is throwing out there. And he's so good. He's such a good salesman. He sells himself as this poor, helpless victim that was trying to get Bitcoin on track, and it was this greatest technology for freedom that was out there, and it got undermined by all these bad actors. And it's such a convincing narrative, but it just doesn't stand up when you look at how Bitcoin actually works under the hood. You go, wait, what is this guy trying to do here? Okay, so everyone just laughed him out of the room and didn't treat him with any respect, and he's just butthurt over it. Okay, I think I get it. That's all it is, and funnily enough, the same thing happened with Elon Musk, and it was even the same issue. Elon Musk showed up and he started throwing his weight around and saying Bitcoin needs to be this, and in one of Musk's mask-off moments, he went, I founded PayPal. I might know a thing or two about how digital currencies are created. He got really offended by Bitcoiners just being like, sorry, dude, sit down. You don't know what you're talking about. And this was hilarious, man, because he got so offended and that was it for him. Like, he just doesn't want to talk about Bitcoin ever again. And like when he was sort of, right after getting offended, he did some interview with him and Jack Dorsey and someone else. And I remember him just saying like, these idiots want small blocks. If I remember him, he just did this. He went, well, if small blocks are so good, why don't you make them smaller then? And I remember him just sort of like folding his arms and like having this smug to himself. Like I've just found out. Have you seen this meme? I just found out about Bitcoin 10 minutes ago and I'm here to fix it. It was just that. And it made us all just go, oh man. Do you not realize that Luke and people like me have been pushing for smaller blocks for years? Because yes, actually small blocks are good. It's not some Goldilocks zone where 1 megabyte is perfect. They are still too big, and the blockchain is still increasing in size at an unwieldy pace. We've been pushing for this for years. I've had 300 kilobytes as a hashtag on my Twitter for well over a year. So I think, and I've been pushing for it for way longer than that. So again, just another person that comes along, and he was a big blocker. It was so funny that when Elon showed up with the big block FUD, we were like, are you serious? Not this again. And instead of it being Roger this time, it was the richest man in the world, if you ignore the people with a lot more money that stay out of the press and aren't constantly marketed to us as being based. Then, yeah, if you're gonna come at us with something like that, it was just done. Like, so 2021, we're like, Elon, just go away, mate. Like, no one can even be bothered with this. Just sell all your coins. And like, they didn't know what to do because they've never seen that before. Normally, if you're encroaching on some financial venture with lots of suits all around, yes men and handshakes and cups of coffee and all that, like that corporate environment, everyone's rolling out the red carpet. And when Elon showed up into Bitcoin, we were just like, oh, you don't like it? Yeah, you should sell. Fuck off. And to him, he was just like, excuse me. Like, he was so offended by it, and he couldn't throw his weight around. And we were like, no, definitely sell. Just definitely sell. We don't want Tesla to own any coins anymore. Go away. It was so funny because he had no idea what to do with that. And he ended up holding and just resenting the fact that he was holding it. This was so funny to me. Anyway, I've gone way off topic. Sorry about that. Yeah, don't fall for this low effort narrative crap. Like, really, if someone sent you this video because you read Hijacking Bitcoin and you were like, wow, I know a thing about Bitcoin now, and Bitcoin isn't what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be decentralized peer-to-peer digital cash, and it's not anymore because these gold bug 2.0 mentality people came and they want to ruin the fact that it's a permissionless payment network by keeping blocks small and artificially limiting the block size and crippling Bitcoin. Understand that if you make blocks bigger, you break all that anyway. So Bitcoin is The sensible Bitcoiners, in summary, were the ones that said, yeah, we need both. We need to not jeopardize the 21 million, and we need to not jeopardize the permissionless payment network of it. But something's got to give. And we can scale the permissionless payment element of it with things like Lightning, and maybe even with things like Covenants, and maybe even with things like Liquid and Fedimint. We can, all of them have varying degrees of trade-offs, but they can alleviate pressure on the base layer, and maybe that gives us permissionless medium of exchange use case in the future. But it doesn't fundamentally take an approach that definitely breaks everything, which is what Roger is pushing for. We're sitting here saying, you know what, congestion in downtown Manhattan is bad, but let's come up with a sensible solution for it. You, Mr. Psychopath that keeps wanting to go on about 1,000-mile cars driving down the road, down 47th Street, can you please stop wasting our time, because it's not a real solution? And can you not go off and cry about it on all the big alternative media outlets talking about how car technology has been hijacked? Can you please just go away? Because we're not interested in your temper tantrums. We actually want to solve the same problem you do, because you're right. It would be a massive problem. The congestion is out of control. What do we do about it? Well, we managed to get our upgrade in. We managed to create a Lightning network. We managed to do bi-directional payment channels, which was not a thing before SegWit. Not that I know of anyway. You, as far as I know, you only had one direction. And these have alleviated problems. And El Salvador did, you know, for all the bad things that are happening at the moment, El Salvador did onboard into Bitcoin, and it did onboard with a Bitcoin that had a Lightning network, and it was able to use that. And I have been to El Salvador, and when I was there, all the payments I made were using Lightning, not Bitcoin. I went there in a high transaction fee environment, and I did not suffer, because Lightning exists, and I was able to use the Bitcoin Roger always dreamed about. It just wasn't on the base layer. It was on the Lightning layer, which is actually a lot better, because you don't have to wait 10 minutes for a block to be found. Who is going to buy coffee and then stand there for 10 minutes while the merchant waits for a block to be found with your transaction in it? Do you know how inefficient that is? Do you know how fundamentally that does not work with so many elements of commerce except online stuff? It doesn't work. You need instant settlement. That's what Lightning does, and it's way cheaper. So we had this solution all along. It's not the only solution, but it works really well. And I can attest to it working really well. And it doesn't break everything else at the same time. Lightning only adds to Bitcoin. It doesn't undermine a bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, I'm going to tell you, if you're listening and believing to people like Roger, hold yourself to a higher standard. These people don't make sincere arguments, and nothing they say checks out if you think about it for long enough. They are politicians. They are relying on the mass of people listening to them with one ear and having a semi-informed opinion where they feel like they know something, but they haven't actually thought about it. So just hold yourself to a higher standard. Don't listen to these charlatans, man. Thanks for watching.